I knew he was going to pull something. The air had shifted the moment Julian Halverson started strutting around the office like a frat boy who just got handed the keys to daddy's Porsche. But I didn't expect this. At exactly 9:00 a.m., he summoned me to the glass conference room like I was some assistant who'd spilled his cold brew. The entire floor could see in, of course. That was the point. He wanted witnesses. He sat at the head of the long table like it was a throne, his overpriced watch catching the light just so. Next to him sat a smug little HR manager with a clipboard and nervous smile. I hadn't even sat down before Julian slid a thick folder toward me like he was serving me court papers. "You've served your purpose," he said, eyes locked on mine. "Time for younger minds to carry the torch." Younger minds. Cute. He was talking about my invention, my biotech framework, the same one I built in my garage before his family even bought their first stake. The one now rebranded and shined up like a debutante at a Wall Street cotillion, ready to be paraded in front of investors for IPO. I flipped open the folder. The HR language was so manufactured it made my teeth hurt. Realignment of strategy, natural inflection point, transition package. I offered Julian a small, tired smile and reached for the pen. "If we're doing this," I said, "let's do it properly." Before I go further, if you've made it this far and haven't hit the subscribe button, now's a good time. 97% of listeners never subscribe, and it really motivates the team to keep sharing stories like this. A quick like or sub helps way more than you think. All right, back to the moment my legacy got hijacked. Julian leaned back in his chair, clearly expecting me to protest. Cry, maybe. Beg. The HR woman was watching me like she expected an emotional meltdown, like I'd throw the folder across the room and demand justice. But I didn't. I signed it. Carefully. Silently. Right next to the spot labeled voluntary separation. I capped the pen, closed the folder, and looked him straight in the eye. "Congratulations," I said softly. "You finally got your name on something." He didn't flinch, just smirked like he'd won a game of chess against a half-asleep grandparent. As I stood up to leave, he said, "We'll be issuing a press release today. You'll be credited as an early contributor." Not founder, not inventor, contributor. I almost laughed. I stepped into the hallway, the entire floor avoiding eye contact like I'd just been diagnosed with something contagious. But I wasn't humiliated. Not even angry, because Julian Halverson had no idea what I'd buried in the original license agreement 15 years ago. He didn't know about Clause 27F. He didn't know that firing me wasn't just stupid, it was the first domino in a cascade that would swallow everything he thought he'd inherited. He thought I was just another stepping stone on his way to becoming the next biotech golden boy. He thought I was gone, but he hadn't even started losing yet. 15 years ago, I was working out of a tiny lab carved into the back half of a failing warehouse in Cincinnati. No trust fund, no strategic partners, just caffeine, bad wiring, and a biotech breakthrough that shouldn't have come from someone like me. The framework I developed, real-time cellular response mapping, wasn't supposed to be possible for another decade. But there it was. Sitting in Petri dishes and handwritten notebooks, held together with sheer willpower and duct tape. When Malcolm Halverson approached me, he was all charm and capital. "You build, we scale," he said, standing in the shadow of my centrifuge like he understood what any of it did. I was skeptical, but broke, and tired, and I thought maybe, just maybe, a partnership would give me space to keep inventing without having to pitch VCs with PowerPoint decks and empty promises. But I didn't trust him. Not fully. I trusted the lawyers I hired behind his back even more. Instead of taking the obvious route, big declarations, board seats, splashy founder credits, I buried my ownership where they'd never see it coming. A licensing agreement? Yes, but wrapped inside a custodial trust, tied to continuous moral use stipulations that no one in their right mind would expect to matter. Clause 27F didn't just state ownership, it made it conditional. It required annual founder reports, ethical attribution, and usage disclosures tied to the spirit of the invention, not just its function. It was, essentially, a trap designed for arrogance. The clause only activated if they got greedy, lazy, or both. And guess what happened? The Halversons scaled all right, bought the lab, rebranded the project, started pitching it to foreign investors like they'd grown it in a family tree. I let them. I let Malcolm talk over me in board meetings, let his son do puff piece interviews where he took credit for ideas I'd written on cocktail napkins. Because the louder they got, the sloppier they became. The further they drifted from the ethical use principles I'd outlined, the closer they got to that hidden tripwire. Julian was the worst of them. He strutted in during year 13 like a wolf in a lab coat. The man wouldn't know a cell assay if it bit him, but he sure knew how to hold a microphone. This technology will revolutionize gene therapy, he said in one TED-style keynote, nodding at slides he didn't understand, using phrases like data-driven compassion, as if he'd coined them himself. He loved being seen as the boy genius, the heir apparent. And I stayed quiet. Even when they removed my name from the project deck, even when the quarterly reports stopped showing up in my inbox, even when the board got reshuffled to favor the Halversons and their cronies, because I knew something they didn't. Every omission, every ethical drift, every lie, they were triggering the clause. Clause 27F wasn't a relic. It wasn't buried and forgotten. It was alive and it was watching. I documented everything, every skipped founder report, every rebranding attempt, every time Julian opened his smug mouth and claimed the invention as his life's work. I didn't need the spotlight. I didn't want the applause. I wanted one thing, for the system I built to protect itself. And that system was almost ready to strike. The sun hadn't even cleared the skyline when I uploaded the form. The day after Julian fired me, I woke up early, made coffee, and sat at the old oak desk in my home office, the one with grooves from decades of writing, drafting, building. My inbox was quiet. No follow-up emails from HR, no polite check-ins, no severance confirmation. Just silence, like they thought ignoring me would make the story end there. I opened my secured archive, clicked through the folder labeled fail-safes, and pulled up the document I'd written years ago but never had to use, until now. Notice of Material Breach of Use Agreement, Clause 27F. It was 6 pages long, dry as bone, and lethal. I filled in the final date, attached the required evidence, and encrypted it for direct submission to the patent office liaison I'd worked with, back when we first structured the licensing framework. He was still there, still respected. Still remembered my name. The evidence? A podcast episode from 2 weeks earlier. Julian sitting on a panel at some startup brofest, sunglasses on indoors, talking about his journey from vision to prototype. I always knew this was going to change the game, he said, with the gall to lean back like he believed it. I built the framework during my last year at Stanford. It just came to me. There it was, on record. Violating the founder attribution clause, the usage transparency clause, and the ethical purpose clause. 3 strikes, 1 smug swing. That soundbite was all I needed, but I added more. Internal slides with my name deleted. Emails where I was marked as former contributor, investor decks with his name stamped over tech I'd authored. I didn't need to explain. The clause was automatic. Once triggered, it revoked all license rights, retroactively. The Halversons didn't just lose usage, they lost history. The patent snapped back to me, legally, cleanly, and with federal teeth behind it. I didn't tell anyone. No fanfare, no press release, just clicked, send, and waited. The funny thing about systems like this, slow justice, quiet safeguards, is they don't need rage, just readiness. You don't scream when it's time to pull the lever. You just breathe. By the time I closed my laptop, the document had landed, time-stamped, verified, irrevocable. The same lawyers who once begged me to modernize the clause structure were now watching it move like a guillotine through everything they thought they'd locked down. And as for Julian, he was probably still in bed, dreaming about IPO day, picturing himself in glossy magazines as the next biotech visionary. He had no idea his kingdom was already starting to rot beneath him. He thought I walked away defeated. What he didn't realize was I didn't walk away. I pulled the trigger. I didn't even need to check the news. The first ping came from an old colleague in Prague, one of the good ones who still believed in ethics over spin. "Did you see this?" he messaged, with a screenshot attached. It was a formal notice from our European distributor, effective immediately. Shipment 331A suspended. Exclusive license revoked pending audit per stipulation, clause 27F. Cold. Surgical. The kind of corporate language that makes lawyers drop their coffee and investors start pacing. 2 hours later, another came in, from Tokyo this time. Our Japanese partner froze 3 ongoing trials. Then Vancouver halted onboarding for the pilot program they'd spent 9 months ramping up for. The wording was the same across the board. Clinical partnerships paused, export rights, pending verification, distribution, subject to owner approval. Owner. Not Halverson Biotech, not Julian Halverson, just owner. Julian had no idea what was happening yet, but the dominoes were already crashing in sequence. Around 8:12 a.m., the executive group chat lit up. Normally reserved for stage celebrations and vacuous "we're a family" posts, it suddenly exploded in panic. Julian. Who the hell filed a revocation notice? Is this a prank? Why are our partners freezing us out? No one answered. Because everyone, every board member, every director, even the senior compliance guy who once mocked my old school documentation style, was too busy reading the legal memo I'd attached anonymously to the investor brief. 31 pages, footnoted, sourced, and notarized, complete with timestamps, podcast transcripts, and the clause itself, highlighted in red. Clause 27F. Immediate revocation of licensing privileges upon breach of moral use stipulation, including but not limited to misattribution, failure of founder reporting, and ethical misalignment in commercialization. The memo didn't just name Julian. It traced every deviation from the clause over the last 3 years, every silent erasure, every inflated claim, every deleted report. It wasn't just a revocation, it was a forensic autopsy. Julian sent 3 more frantic messages. This is a joke. Someone say something. Why is my dashboard locked? Who did this? Still nothing. The silence in that chat room probably screamed louder than any reply ever could, because they all knew. Maybe not the full story, not yet, but they felt the ground shift. And worse, they realized there was no bottom to it. I poured another cup of coffee, watched the sunrise through my kitchen window, same house, same desk, same routine. But out there, the castle was crumbling, quietly, elegantly. No bombs, no fire, just contracts and consequences doing what they were designed to do. Julian thought he'd inherited a dynasty. He didn't realize the land under his feet was leased, and I just tore up the ground rights. No screaming, no confrontation, just a castle, slowly swallowing itself from the inside out. He called just after 9. No assistant, no legal buffer. Just Malcolm Halverson, CEO of Halverson Biotech, patriarch of the Golden Boy Dynasty, sounding suddenly very small on the other end of the line. I thought we had an understanding, he said, his voice calm but brittle, like he was holding a glass sculpture and watching it crack in his hands. We did, I said, leaning back in my chair. Then your son rebranded my name out of history. Silence. I could hear his breathing shift, that telltale pause people make when they realize their legacy is slipping through their fingers, and there's no one left to blame but blood. I didn't gloat, didn't raise my voice. I wasn't angry anymore, not in that moment, just done. Done being polite, done being erased. He cleared his throat. Tell me what you want. I let the quiet stretch, just long enough for it to sting. A clean exit, I said finally. You keep the Halverson name, the board, the building, the little ego tower your son's been climbing. Then I pulled up the file on my screen. 1 click, 1 document. I reclaim my license, fully, without dispute. That's generous. I could hear him shift in his chair, could almost see him rubbing his forehead, trying to find an angle that no longer existed. The truth was, there wasn't one. His son had already detonated the clause. The system I'd built didn't care about regret. It cared about rules. I hit send. You should check your inbox, I said. He didn't reply for several seconds. When he finally did, his voice was flatter, resigned. You had this ready. For years. I wasn't bluffing. The revocation certificate had been reviewed, signed, notarized, and authenticated before sunrise. It was irreversible. Federal databases had already been updated. The patent no longer belonged to Halverson Biotech in any capacity, not partially, not in spirit, not even as a footnote. He tried one more time. We could negotiate a new structure. I almost laughed. You want to structure ethics, After erasing a founder and faking lineage, "This will destroy the IPO," he muttered, mostly to himself. "Then you shouldn't have built it on stolen ground." I wasn't cruel. I didn't hang up with a dramatic line. I let him sit in the silence of his own making, with the digital weight of that certificate now sitting in his inbox, stamped, verified, irrevocable. That's what people like Malcolm never understood. They thought winning meant being loudest, richest, most visible. But the truth is, real power doesn't scream. It files quietly. It signs slowly. And when the time comes, it doesn't ask. It revokes. The emergency session was held behind closed doors, but I didn't need to be there to know how it unfolded. The signs were already bleeding through the cracks, stockholders pulling out, PR firms on radio silence, and whispers traveling faster than press releases ever could. Malcolm chaired the meeting, pale and sunken, his usual executive swagger carved down to raw survival mode. The lights in the boardroom burned too bright for how little control they had left. He looked around the table, flanked by senior counsel and the head of investor relations, all of them flipping through binders that suddenly meant nothing. Julian was nowhere to be found. Word was he was on the phone with 3 banks trying to unfreeze operating accounts, begging them to disregard the change in licensing authority. But that's not how Clause 27F worked. There was no undo button, no appeals. Once the revocation was triggered and verified, the patent, their golden goose, their entire valuation engine, slid out from under them like a pulled rug. The lead compliance officer, usually smug and bored in meetings like these, looked visibly rattled. "We're dead in the water," he said under his breath. "Licensing is revoked in every major jurisdiction. Canada, Japan, EU, the audit trail is clean." Clean because I kept it that way. They'd built the entire IPO forecast around my tech. Future earnings, investor pitch decks, cross-border trials, every projection hinged on ownership that no longer existed. It was like planning a wedding and finding out the venue never confirmed the booking. Except this wedding was priced at $1.1 billion and broadcast to Wall Street. The board chair, a man who once told me, "You're too emotionally attached to your work to scale," tapped his fingers on the table and stared at the legal packet in front of him. "How long have we been exposed?" he asked, his voice low. There was a pause. Then one of the senior partners, a woman I used to respect before she joined Julian's Rewrite the Past campaign, muttered just loud enough to be heard, "Since the day he got cocky." Nobody argued, because it was true. Julian had fumbled into the tripwire with the elegance of a toddler playing with a loaded gun, his podcast gloating, the erasure of founder credits, the violation of the moral use stipulation. It wasn't just careless. It was arrogant. And arrogance was what Clause 27F had been waiting for. Malcolm tried to salvage what was left. "Can we restructure the IPO around our other assets?" The CFO didn't even lift her head. Without the biotech core, we're a logistics company with under 3% margin. The irony was delicious. They had spent years stripping me out of the narrative, reducing my contributions to footnotes while building a valuation machine around tech I never fully gave away. Now, they were holding board meetings not about growth, but about triage. Malcolm whispered something to his general counsel, probably asking how fast they could sue me, or whether they could challenge the revocation. I already knew the answer. They couldn't. They signed the original agreement themselves. All of them. Legal ownership wasn't just a filing, it was the foundation. And when it moved, everything else crumbled. Julian thought the patent was his crown. Turns out it was the pin in the grenade. I never wanted the throne. Not back then, and certainly not now. Watching the Halversons implode wasn't some victory lap for me. It was just the dust settling after years of quiet disrespect. When people asked if I'd come back, reclaim the company, rebrand everything under my name, I shook my head. That chapter was scorched. I wasn't interested in patching a sinking ship. I was already building something new. While Julian was busy throwing tantrums in legal rooms and Malcolm was scrambling to pacify investors, I was in talks with a research collective based out of Portland. No fanfare, no bloated board, no corporate pageantry. Just scientists. People who still wore worn lab coats. People who still got excited about Petri dish results. People who looked at my framework and didn't ask how fast it could monetize, but how fast it could heal. I didn't relicence the patent directly. That was deliberate. I appointed a custodial tech transfer firm, neutral, airtight, built on compliance and transparency. Their job was simple: handle all licensing agreements under strict moral use parameters, report quarterly, and enforce attribution like a religion. No shortcuts, no loopholes, no tech bros with pitch decks and empty eyes. Within a week, the freeze on my tech lifted because it wasn't frozen anymore. It was clean, untouched by Halverson hands, and open for partnership under my terms. Our former European distributor came back first, then 2 universities. Then an independent clinical research hub that had walked away years ago in protest when Julian took over. I didn't chase anyone. I just watched the dominoes tip back toward center. And something else shifted, quietly. The first time it happened was in an academic paper, co-authored by a Harvard team testing the framework for early-stage autoimmune therapy. I scanned through it casually, half expecting the usual corporate whitewashing. But there it was, right at the top. Licensing courtesy of the Hudson Cellular Framework, developed by Dr. Mira Hudson, founder 2010. It didn't stop there. My name, once deleted from board slides and scrubbed from investor decks, started showing up again, in journals, in grant applications, even on keynote slides at conferences I hadn't set foot in for a decade. No applause, no standing ovations, just presence. Real, earned, factual presence. I didn't need interviews or cover stories. I didn't need Julian's plastic smile or Malcolm's fake apologies. I needed the truth to stand. And it did. On paper, in print, in legacy, all without me raising my voice once. It was raining that morning, one of those cold, sideways drizzles that makes even the city feel like it's holding its breath. I was heading downtown for a quiet meeting with the custodial team when I passed Halverson Biotech's new tower. Glass and steel, 10 stories tall, polished like a mirror and twice as empty, the kind of place that used to hum with curated energy, all badge access and buzzwords. Now it just sat there, silent. The lobby lights were off, not dimmed, off. The front desk where Julian once posed for a lifestyle profile, arms crossed like a messiah in sneakers, was empty. Gone were the IPO banners. Gone were the glass-etched logos and those smug little mission statements they used to print on the walls like gospel. In their place, taped crookedly to the inside of the revolving doors, was a single flyer, printed in black and white. Under review by regulatory authority. Entry suspended pending audit findings. Just like that. The company that used to send press releases every time Julian sneezed was now reduced to a half-sheet notice, fluttering in the wind like an eviction sign. I stood there for a minute, not out of satisfaction, not even nostalgia, just stillness, watching what arrogance leaves behind when it runs out of lawyers. That's when I heard someone behind me. He really didn't know, did he? I turned. It was Daniel Lin, one of the few engineers I respected from the early years. Smart. Careful. Back then, he actually read the tech docs instead of faking it for meetings. He looked older now, a little more tired, but there was something in his expression that felt like closure. No, I said. He never asked what happens when you breach Clause 27F. Daniel shook his head, lips tight. Malcolm always said the clause was symbolic. Malcolm always said a lot of things. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even particularly smug. It was just the truth. They thought Clause 27F was some dusty artifact buried in legalese, a founder's vanity scribbled in a licensing agreement no one would ever check. But that clause wasn't symbolic. It was structural. It was the root system beneath everything they built, and when they cut it, the entire thing rotted from within. Julian had been on a press tour when it happened. I'd seen the photos, him in some designer hoodie, smiling on a panel next to CEOs twice his age, talking about innovation like it was something you could trademark. That smile didn't last long. Once the revocation hit the global registry, it was over. Contracts nullified, clinical trials invalidated, regulatory bodies alerted, investors gone in days. I heard rumors he tried to salvage a pivot, offering a blockchain twist on the platform, claiming decentralized application rights. Whatever that means. It didn't matter. The framework was never his. He could remix the language all he wanted, but the tech, the soul of it, wasn't something you could rebrand. Not anymore. I glanced one last time at the flyer. Funny how quiet it all ends. No sirens, no headlines, just glass reflections and wet pavement. Daniel tucked his hands into his coat. You gonna say anything publicly? I shook my head. The clause said everything that needed saying. We stood there a few seconds longer, watching rain drip from the awning where their stock ticker used to run. Then we walked away, separately. There was nothing left to see. The post came through my inbox late one night, forwarded from a former colleague with the subject line, "You'll love this." No message, just a link. It led to Julian's newest rebrand. No more biotech messiah, no lab coats or TEDx spotlights. Just a washed-out photo of him sitting on a sunlit bench, chin resting on his fist, like he'd just discovered the concept of introspection. His caption read, "Taking some time to reflect. Excited for the next chapter, advising early-stage startups on how to avoid the kinds of founder conflicts that can derail innovation. Lessons learned." I stared at it for a moment. Not angry, not smug, just tired. There was something so perfectly tragic about it, like watching someone try to sell wisdom they never actually earned. He'd turned the collapse of a company into personal branding, using the ruins as set design for his comeback arc. But the internet, for all its short memory, still had a few sharp eyes. Buried in the comments was one from a former investor. Old money, the kind that used to fly in for quarterly updates and sip espresso like it was part of the dress code. No profile photo, just words. "Start by reading the original contract next time, son." That was it. No applause. No pile on, just a single sentence dropped like a gavel. Julian didn't respond. Of course he didn't. There's no pivot strategy for that kind of truth. I closed the tab, deleted the email. I didn't need to frame the comment or print it out like a trophy. The clause had done its work. The paper trail was permanent, and in every legal system that mattered, my name was restored, my contribution secured, my rights reasserted in ink. I never got a phone call, never saw a retraction. But I didn't need them. Legacy doesn't need a microphone. It needs documentation, footnotes, cold, traceable authorship. That's what Julian never understood. He thought being loud made you a leader. He thought credit was a volume game. He thought firing me was the final move in some boardroom chess match. But the thing about rules is, you only win if you understand who wrote them. He fired me thinking he'd won the game. He didn't know I'd written the rules.